welcome. A very warm welcome. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you on a crazy, crazy ride into the future. And here's the best thing. At the end of the 30 minutes, you will be what we call a certified practical futurist. So you can go to the friends of the Festival de las Ideas, and they will give you a certification that you are actually practical futurists. With that being said, I want to start into our presentation and talk about the future. If my friends can bring up my slides, that would be amazing. While we're waiting for my slides, a quick dance routine. Friends, slides. Oh, there we go. I should press the button. Warm welcome. Let's talk about the future. Here's the thing about the future. The future is a pretty wild, crazy place. And I love to begin my presentation with a quote. This quote is from a gentleman called Jorge Paulo Lemann. And Jorge Paulo Lemann is the co-founder of 3G Capital, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. And oh, by the way, I forgot to say, my friends from YPO, hello. We will have very, very valuable take-home values for you today. So, Jorge Paulo Lemann, co-founder of 3G Capital, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. Amongst other things, they own AB InBev, the beer brewer. And I give him a lot of credit because Jorge was on a stage like this, in front of his peers and colleagues, in front of running cameras. And he said the following. He said, "I am a terrified dinosaur. I've been living in this cozy world of big brands and big volumes and nothing changes very much. And you could just focus on being very efficient and you'd be okay. And all of a sudden, we're being disrupted in all ways." And I think that's exactly what is happening in the world. You heard already from many of my friends and colleagues about the disruption we're seeing in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and digital biology and many other topics. And we're going to unpack this a little bit today. Now, here's a question I have for you. If you're thinking about the future and you see this following sentence, the question of like, the future is blank. What is the first word which comes to your mind? A brave soul, just throw it out in the room. My friends from YPO, what do you think about the future? What is the first word which comes to your mind? Okay, yeah. Scary, exciting. The future is now, the future is today. Hopeful. I love that. Wonderful. Here's the thing. We think the future is a paradox. The future is a very weird thing. In the future, we actually see the future as all of these things at the same time. The future, on one hand, is scary. I mean, just look at what happens in the Ukraine and Russia, the war over there. And at the same time, the future is hopeful and exciting. And I want to give you a different frame about the future. I want you to think about the future differently. If you put yourself there, which is the, I'm sorry, let me just roll this back for 1 second. I just see that I see on my screen a different slide than you see. This is pretty exciting. So let's do this differently. Let me go back. You remember Jorge Paulo Lemann? Yes. Great quote, right? Good quote. Now, let me get here. Everything you need to know about the future, forget what I ever said before. They literally showed, I've got different slides on the middle screen here. So everything you need to know about the future, I can summarize in a single slide. And that slide is something we show you when you come to Singularity University. You heard my friend Raymond McCauley, who's a professor over at Singularity. I used to be at Singularity as well. We have a week-long program there. That program costs you $16,000 for a whole week. And all we're doing is showing you one slide. We show you this slide, the exponential curve. And you know this, right? You've seen it before because technology moves on these exponentially accelerating curves. But I think what's important to understand is this. If you're standing somewhere where this gentleman stands, and I would argue in many technologies, many of the things you're hearing today and you heard yesterday and you're going to hear tomorrow, we are there. We're at this point where the curves not have fully taken off, where the world isn't quite as crazy. And you look to the past, and the past is your only point of reference. The only thing we know for sure, right? It's all they teach you in school is the past. If you look to the past, you see that the past feels flat and linear. It feels like nothing really has changed. If you have the ability to see the future looks crazy and steep and wild. And there's a beautiful quote which summarizes this so powerfully. And some of you might have seen the little stick figure I have here. This is Ernest Hemingway, at least his head. And there's a quote from Ernest Hemingway in a book called The Sun Also Rises, which Some say it's the best book he ever wrote. And in this book has a quote, which of course we're taking completely out of context. And we call this the Hemingway law of motion. And the shortest version of this quote is this: gradually and then suddenly. Because that's exactly how this world moves. It feels like for a long time nothing happens. And then suddenly the world just changed. And we're going to unpack this. Because here's the thing. I believe, as you are now becoming practical futurists, your first skill, we are training 3 skills today, your first skill is to be able to see the early part of the exponential curve, the early part of this change. Something the futurist Amy Webb calls weak signals, the early changes. The historian Fernand Braudel has a framing for this. He says these are the thin wisps of tomorrow. And I think we need to see them. And of course, you come here for this festival to see those things. But it's important to understand something. Rob Walker, who's another colleague of ours, he's a futurist, he said that there are no shortcuts. There's no algorithm. If all you're tracking is what everybody else is tracking, all you're seeing is trends, and you know what everybody else already knew. To discover, you have to dig. Or in other words, once something becomes a trend, it is not the future anymore, because everybody knows it. So let's look at digging. And I want to give you one example. I want to show you how we are digging. What is our practice so you can learn from it. And we want to talk about computers. And I want to talk about computers because computers are the mother of all exponential trends. You know that your smartphone is as powerful as a supercomputer from the 70s. So I will not bore you with that. I want to show you something different. This here is a digital pregnancy test. In the United States, you can buy them for about $3 US. You use them once, it tells you if you're pregnant or not, you throw it into the trash can. A computer hacker, about a year ago, at the height of the pandemic, probably because they were totally bored out of their mind, bought one of those tests. And they asked themselves an interesting question, which I think is the good starting question to explore what a weak signal looks like. They asked themselves, I wonder what's inside of it. So they bought one. Remember, $3 US, it's not expensive. So they bought one, took it apart, and what they found is rather interesting. Inside of this digital pregnancy test, you find a normal pregnancy test. You know the one with the 2 lines? And then there's a little sensor, and it reads this data, and it sends it to a little computer, a chip. And that chip is powered by battery and shows you on a display if you're pregnant or not. Now, the first question you can ask, of course, is why would you do this? It's the same thing. I don't know if any one of you has taken a COVID test recently, the one with the 2 lines, and you get like super confused if you're positive or negative and what positive and negative actually even means. Like, is it positive that I'm negative or is it negative that I'm positive? So it's kind of nice to have a device which says, you're pregnant, yes, no, very clearly. But then the computer hacker started asking more questions because it's all about the question. And the computer hacker asked himself, I wonder how expensive the chip on this device is and how powerful it is. Because remember, it's a little computer, right? You don't think about it as a computer. It's a one-use device. You throw it into the trash can, but it is a computer. So the computer hacker looked it up. They did some digging. And what they found is rather interesting. The chip on this device costs less than $30 US, so it's really cheap. It has to be cheap, of course. But the chip on this device has the same compute power as the original IBM PC. The very device which created Microsoft, which gave you Word and Excel. And because we are computer hackers, what do? We put the computer game Doom on there, so next time you're waiting for your pregnancy test results, you can play a round of Doom. I am not sure what this means for humanity, right? But that's a different story. Now, here's the thing. You might look at this and you say, man, Pascal, we've come a long way. Or you might look at this and laugh about it, as I did. It's funny, right? It's crazy. But I look at this and I ask myself, what is this a weak signal for? What is the world we're moving into where a computer which costs 30 cents is the same power as an original IBM PC which costs like $5,000? And this is where it gets interesting, because here's the thing. Computers used to be roomfuls of electronics. They were mainframe computers. They were ginormous. And then we made them smaller and they became the size of a fridge. And then we made them smaller and they became so small that you can put them on your desk. And then we made them smaller and they became so small that you can put them into your backpack. And then we made them smaller once again and we made them so small that you can put them into your back pocket. And now we're making them so small that what my friend Alan Wirfs Brock likes to say, we're making them ambient. They're just there. You don't even think about these things as computers anymore. And here's the insight. Every time we moved from one compute era to the next, the world changed. Not a little bit. The world changed dramatically. And not just the world changed, but also the companies which dominated this world changed. IBM dominated the game of mainframes. Then came Microsoft dominating the world of PCs. Then came Apple and Google dominating the world of handheld devices. And now we're moving into a world where I'm not sure if any of these companies will dominate the world anymore. That's the crazy thing. So, that being said, once you start opening your eyes towards these weak signals, these early indicators of change, you see them everywhere. This is just a couple of the areas where you can look. You know, the metaverse, augmented virtual reality, the future of news and information, decentralization, the blockchain, Bitcoin, etc. You see it everywhere. So what I want you to do is, and this is skill number one on your journey to become a practical futurist, is open up your eyes and ask yourself a powerful question. I got this question from a gentleman called Guy Kawasaki. Guy Kawasaki was the first evangelist at Apple. He's a good friend of mine. 10 years ago, he gave me that question. When you see something which feels weird, strange, ask yourself, don't look away, but ask yourself, isn't that interesting? Because that allows you to look at things differently. If you do this once a day for 1 year, you have looked at 365 new things. If 90% of those things turn out to be crap, not useful, you still have seen 36 new insights which the person next to you hasn't seen. So do yourself a favor, start looking for those weak signals. Skill number one. Skill number two is, and my friends from YPO, you should sit here and say, Pascal, that's great, but not every weak signal will turn into a strong signal. Not every one of these signals turns into something which is real. Of course not. So the question becomes, how do you find out what's real and what isn't? And the million-dollar question, of course, is, when will it become real? For that, I give you another model. And let me reintroduce our friend, the exponential curve, and I want to layer in a new curve. That new curve is your expectation, the blue line. Because here's the reality. We get super excited about new technology. When I see a new technology, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to change the world. It's amazing. But then you realize very quickly that in the beginning of technology, it's not good. And what you do is you get disappointed. Classic example, I used to work at Google when we released Google Glass. Quick show of hands. Anyone knows what Google Glass is, played with it? Okay, we've got a few people here. Awesome. So Google Glass was this augmented reality glasses. I was one of the first users of Google Glass in the world. They gave me my pair, and this is a true story. They gave me my pair. I walked back from my office where they gave me my pair to another meeting. There was a 30-minute walk across the Google campus. In those 30 minutes, I realized three things. First of all, the features of Google Glass are mediocre. You can't actually do anything with it. It's, rather useless. Secondly, when I arrived 30 minutes later, the battery was empty. So the battery life is terrible. And then I looked into the mirror, and I realized I looked like a complete idiot. So what do? You get disappointed. But the problem with disappointment is you're dismissing. You say it's not good, it won't be good. But then eventually technology gets better. 2007, Steve Jobs gets on stage, shows you the iPhone for the first time. You're like, oh my God, the world changed. And then you get to chaos and amazement, where you can't keep up with the changes we're seeing in the world. So here's your first insight. It takes years, often decades, for a technology to mature. The good news for you is you can sit back. You can relax. You don't need to do anything with the new technology. Just wait for it to mature. The bad news is, once it is good enough, once it has matured, you have no time whatsoever. You've got only 6 to 18 months before the markets are being made. So the question is timing. You need to get the timing right. And for that, we have a very simple framework, which is you look at a technology and you ask yourself the maturity question. How mature is the technology? 0 means it's physically impossible. There's a special place in hell for startups building companies which are physically impossible. They exist. Then 1 is It's theoretically possible. I can theoretically beam you, like in Star Trek, from point A to point B. Nobody's ever done it. There's a million challenges here. Theoretically, it should be possible. And then number 10 is, we know exactly how to do it. So this gives you an indication of where is a technology in its maturity. Let me give you an example. This here is our good old friend Elon Musk. And Elon is a good example because he's got a bunch of technology companies we can look at. And when you look at his companies and you look at the ones which actually work, which are surprisingly successful or not surprisingly successful, you realize that the underlying technology for all of these companies is old. We know how to do it and we know how to scale it. Building cars, Tesla, we know how to do for 100 years. Building an electric car, we also know how to do. Solar City, this is the company which does solar panels. We know how to do solar panels. The Boring Company, it drills holes into the world. Of course we know how to do that. And even Starlink, the satellite company, at least since Sputnik, since the Russians sent Sputnik into the world, we know how to do satellites. Then you look at the companies which are somewhere in between, where there's a couple of challenges here which they work in the lab, we need to work them out. SpaceX is a good example for this. And by the way, none of these companies is easy to build. That's a whole different story. But you look at a company like SpaceX, the fins, which make these rockets reusable so that you don't need to dump them into the water, but you can land them. These fins, the technology for those fins was invented by the Russians in 1970. We know how to do it. We couldn't do it for a long time because you need computers and all kinds of stuff. But we know how to do it, at least in the lab. And then you look at the companies which actually don't work. And you look at a company like, for example, Hyperloop. Hyperloop is this transportation system where we put you into a vacuum tube and we shoot you like a bullet across the land. There's some really interesting challenges in this company. One of them, for example, nobody knows how to accelerate and decelerate you without killing you. So, you know, it's kind of nice to know that if you get on a train and you drive from, like, say, San Francisco to LA, that you actually arrive alive and not dead. Right? So Hyperloop doesn't work. The scientist Rodney Brooks once said that if an idea builds on practical experience, then cautious or guarded optimism is in order. So this is the first thing you want to do. You want to look at what is the maturity of the technology. Second point, when you look at a technology, you want to also look at something we like to call Gestalt. You might by now have realized I have a bit of an accent, so I was born in Germany. Gestalt is a German word. It's a very unique German word. It only exists in the German language as a concept. And it's also one of the few German words, if any one of you speaks German or has ever seen German, it's one of the few German words which is not 26 characters long, so it's nice and short. The Gestalt is the holistic view of everything. It's kind of, it comes out of the arts. The way we like to think about the Gestalt is this. When you look at a technology, there's things you can influence. There's like technology you can develop, you can like build, etc. It's surrounded by a whole bunch of things you have no influence over. But these things can be a head or a tailwind. They can accelerate your technology and your rollout, or they can blow against you. And the way we like to think about this is we use the acronym STEEPS. Stands for Scientific and Technological, Environmental and Economic, Political and Social Breakthroughs. So the question you want to ask yourself is not just look at the technology itself, but you want to look at all the surrounding factors and say, what else needs to be in place or needs to be removed for this technology to work? Essentially, you want to look at the dependencies. Simplest example, you know Netflix, the streaming video company. If you don't have broadband internet at home, if you're still using dial-up modems, you will not watch Netflix. This is nothing Netflix can control, so you have to take it into account. Or talking about self-driving cars. There's a whole bunch of stuff. If you are Elon Musk, which you can influence, you can make your own sensors. You can build your own software. You can build your own processors for it, for the AI which is needed for it. But there's a million factors you need to take into account. One of them, for example, who is responsible if the car has an accident? Is it you, the driver, who didn't drive? Is it the car manufacturer? Is it the maker of the software which drives the car? There's not a single country in the world where this is established. And as long as that isn't established, you can't insure these cars, meaning you can't even drive these cars. Here's another data point. This came out literally only last week. The Pew Research Institute in the United States did a representative survey of Americans. And amongst other things, they said, how much do you think AI for self-driving cars is good for the society? And here's the stunning result. 44% of Americans have said that AI for cars is a bad idea for society. Try to sell someone a self-driving car if their belief is it's a bad idea for society. Nearly 3/4 of Americans say it's at least not a good idea. So if you're Tesla, you need to understand that there is a lot of convincing you need to do in the market. So this is factor number 2. And then the third one. In the beginning of a technology, this is where you want to watch it closely. This is where you don't do anything. You just sit down and you look at the maturity of the technology. You map out the gestalt. And then eventually it gets hotter. The technology gets more mature. And it should start to inform your strategy. And then you want to apply the third filter, which is the utility filter. How much utility, how useful is the technology? And the question we like to ask are 3 questions. Frequency, density, and friction. How often do you encounter the problem? How much time do you spend with the problem? And how much pain does it cause you? If you have a problem which you only encounter once a year, it's really only a minor inconvenience, and you only spend a few seconds solving it, you don't have a business. If you have something which you encounter every day, you spend hours in it, it's really painful for you, then you have a business. So you want to apply those third filters. And then, of course, once a technology masters these 3 tests, then you want to get and act, and want to act strongly. So 3 factors: the maturity and the scalability, the gestalt, and the utility of a technology. So by now, you know how to look for weak signals, you know how to filter for strong signals, and you have a sense of understanding when will they become real. And I want to close on a quick discussion about disruption, because all of this leads to disruption, and disruption is everywhere. This is a search trend from Google for the last 15 years. You see it's rising and rising and rising. You can't open the newspaper and it doesn't say disruption in it. And typically people like myself, they get on stage here, they say, "Hola Puebla, let me tell you a story of Kodak, Blockbuster, and Nokia." Right. And if you're anything like me, you just want to throw up in your mouth a little bit. By the way, I want to hear how that Spanish translates into Spanish. You want to throw up in your mouth a little bit because you heard that story so many times. Well, it's always the same story. Kodak got disrupted by the digital camera despite the fact they invented the digital camera. Blockbuster gets destroyed by Netflix. Nokia gets decimated by the iPhone and the Android phones. We have an interesting obsession with looking at the disruptors. And that's fine, we can learn a lot from Netflix. But I think we're missing a more important point. And this goes back to Clayton Christensen, the great disruption inventor, an incredible scholar whom we all have much to owe to. And he once said that people don't buy products. What they do is they hire them to make progress towards in specific circumstances. You don't buy a drill. What you want to do is you want to hang a picture. The drill is just a way to get there. And here's the thing. Clayton called this the jobs to be done. You hire a product for you to do a job. And the important thing in all of these disruption stories is that the underlying job to be done never changes. It's always the same job. It's just a different way to think about it. You're still taking pictures. You're taking way more pictures than ever before. You're still watching movies way more than ever before in the comfort of your home. They just don't come to you as a VHS video cassette. You're still communicating on a phone. And that's the reason why we think disruption is what we like to call a state change. State change is a concept out of the physics world that really helps you understand when something happens in the market, how it plays out. Simple example. You take water. This is the physical example. When it's frozen its ice, you warm it, it becomes liquid, and it becomes water. You warm it further, it becomes gas. The in-between is what they call a state change. The important thing is, and this is the reason why we think it maps so nicely, is the underlying molecule, water, H2O, never changed. And also state changes, and by the way, the molecule is our mapping towards the job to be done, right? This is the job to be done, has never changed. And then also state changes don't happen in a perfectly nice linear fashion. They happen in these exponentially accelerating curves. Good example. I recently boiled water for spaghetti. And everybody who's cooking knows what I'm talking about. You have the pot of water on the oven. You're waiting for it to boil because you know that you can only put the spaghetti in when the water is actually boiling. And you see the bubbles coming up. And you're just waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting. And the moment you turn around, the water boils over. It's always the same, right? It's the same with state changes. And here's how this maps into our world. In every state, remember, state is the way how I fulfill a customer need today. There's a phase of stability in the beginning. This is if you're an incumbent organization, there's no way you can disrupt. Like if you're an incumbent organization, you make all the money, you build a moat around your castle, everything is nice. But then you see the weak signals creeping in. And that's the reason why I taught you about weak signals. Because the weak signals show you a gradual change in the way the state is delivered. And then you get eventually to strong signals and the whole world just breaks apart. And you get to sudden changes. And let me give you one last example on how this plays out in the world and why this is so important. Let's take Blockbuster. Blockbuster's state in which they operated was, of course, VHS video cassettes, which you got from a store. At the height of the Blockbuster empire, Blockbuster had some 9,000 stores all across of North America. There's a famous saying which said that in urban North America, there was a Blockbuster within 10 minutes from you. That's the state Blockbuster was in. The important thing to understand about Blockbuster is not an entertainment company. Blockbuster is a real estate company. They know better than anyone else where to put a store, how to merchandise it, in which zip code, what's the perfect distance, etc., etc. And then the state changed, and we got to DVDs. So instead of a VHS video cassette, you get it to DVD. And when you look at a DVD, you realize a couple things very quickly. First of all, they're more convenient, video quality is better, but you can put them into an envelope, and I can ship them to your house. And I solved two problems. Problem number one is even 10 minutes, you still need to drive to the store. Now I can ship it to your house. It's right there. It's convenient. Problem number two is, very often when you walk to Blockbuster and you wanted to see the latest movie, it was rented out. But if I ship it to you, I can actually control this. It's much easier to control. So Netflix was born. Netflix ships you a DVD to your house in an envelope. Now here's the important thing. The way you do this is you run a mail order operation. Right? Like it's all about like running a mail order operation where it's pick, pack, and ship. You need to know in which place you put it, etc., etc. Blockbuster has no idea how to run a mail order operation. The existing skills and processes became obsolete overnight. And that is the most important thing you can learn about state changes, because if you have an incumbent, it is incredibly hard for an incumbent to move from one state to the next. Because as an incumbent, you need to learn that your existing skills and processes became obsolete. And of course, the state changed once more. We went from DVDs to streaming video. In the streaming video world, you don't run mail order operations. Now you run server farms and write software and negotiate rights with Hollywood. And the only reason why our friends from Netflix could manage this transition so well is because Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, knew that the DVD is only an in-between state. He knew that he needs to build a streaming video company. That was the goal. And the DVD was just a way to get there until broadband internet was there and until we could actually do what he wanted to do. Let me close out on a quote. We opened with a quote. I want to close with a quote. This is a dear friend of mine. This is Ron Shaich. Ron is the founder of Pionero Bread, a healthy fast food chain in the United States, very successful. They were very early in digital transformation. So they had like tablets in their shops. You could order online, all this good stuff. Ron sold the company for $7.6 billion, which is a massive, massive multiple over what you would normally get. I sat down with Ron for dinner. He paid. He's much richer than I am, just so we're clear. I asked Ron, how did you do this? And he said something so profound to me that I wrote it down on a piece of paper. He said, our approach has always been to discover today what will matter tomorrow, and then to transform our company into a future that is unfolding before us. And I think that's exactly what we have to do as leaders. We need to figure out, what does tomorrow look like? And of course, the reason why you're here at this wonderful conference is to learn about tomorrow. Figure out what tomorrow looks like and then create the tomorrow you like. Now, with that being said, let me end on this picture, because here's the beauty. The future is unwritten. Every single day you all get a chance to create the future, and if you screw it up one day, totally fine. Wake up the next day, do it again, because the future really is unwritten. Nobody can tell you what the future is. You are creating that future. Friends, thank you so much. Apologies for the hiccup in the beginning. That was fun, and I see you soon. Thank you.